There's been quite a few Toho monsters introduced in the Monsterverse, besides of course Godzilla. There's Rodan, King Ghidorah, Mothra, and Mechagodzilla. Many fans want more Toho monsters included, especially a classic fan favorite, Anguirus. But what if I told you that Anguirus is actually in the Monsterverse? Not in just a novel or a comic or something, but in the film Godzilla King of the Monsters. When Godzilla survived the oxygen destroyer, it caused so much damage that he wasn't able to kill Ghidorah, and he had to swim deep into his lair to rest. But because of Ghidorah's danger, they needed him back up there to fight, so they opted to detonate an atomic bomb to juice him back up, Serizawa being the one to sacrifice himself to do it. The incredibly large explosion caused so much damage to the environment, if you stop at the right moment, you can actually see a type of Easter egg, being the skeleton of a very familiar monster that looks a lot like Anguirus. This moment of course confirms that Anguirus technically is in the Monsterverse, but the context isn't as simple as that. Why is the skeleton there? How did this Anguirus die? Is it a skeleton of a single member of the Titanus Anguirus species, or is it the Anguirus himself? For this video, I wanted to give my own take on how I would fit Anguirus into the Monsterverse. Anguirus is often considered by the fans at least a very important kaiju in the Godzilla franchise, from being the very first monster that he's fought to being considered a friend of Godzilla, such as his various team-ups with him and how well they work together, etc. I wanted to match that here. Anguirus has always been a pretty simple monster, not having any special powers or attacks like Godzilla's atomic ray, Space Godzilla's crystals, or Mothra's healing ability. So he's very easy to translate into the Monsterverse. We have a legit skeleton of him, so he does already exist there. Anguirus' first appearance was in Godzilla Raids Again in 1955. Instead of being a mutated dinosaur, he seems to have been a naturally occurring animal, though for some reason he is stated to be an Ankylosaurus that lived around 150 million years ago, who was awakened by the atomic bombs just like Godzilla. Originating from Siberia, he'd have two fights with Godzilla, one on Iwado Island and the second one being in Osaka, where he'd die against Godzilla. After that, he'd be a reoccurring monster. At first, the Godzilla movies were very dark and bleak, but would then have a much more light-hearted setting to them, with Anguirus now being written as a close friend to Godzilla, having numerous team-ups with Godzilla, such as fighting against Gigan, King Ghidorah, and King Ghidorah a second time. So after decades, with his last showing being a brutal beatdown from Mechagodzilla, he'd show up again in a much more upgraded look in Godzilla Final Wars. Not really having a backstory like most of the other kaiju, but being mind-controlled by the Exilians, though in his upgraded design, he'd have a lot more the resemblance to an armadillo, such as his ability to curl into a perfect ball to cause massive amounts of damage, which would then be translated to his Showa design in his various comic appearances. Monsterverse has a pretty realistic, naturalistic take on the monsters, where instead of viewing Ghidorah as some evil monster, for example, they view him as an invasive species taking over other ecosystems. How Mothra and Godzilla's relationship is symbiotic, like how animals act in real life. How badgers and foxes have a symbiotic relationship, where badgers will dig out prey in a tunnel and the fox will go after it. I want to have this same type of symbiotic relationship for them both, but first, going over the design. The design for Anguirus in the Monsterverse has his spikes pointing back rather than forward, like how it's pointed forward in Final Wars, but straight out in his Showa design. He'd definitely be having the downward pointing spikes along with the bands in his shell and the Ankylosaurus club. So having elements of Final Wars, but also the more animalistic design choices that Monsterverse Titans have, like Mothra's claws and stinger, Ghidorah's quadrupedal bat-like walking, and Godzilla's elephant-like feet with his gills. So he'd be having both the bands so he can curl into a ball and the club to cause massive damage to other titans. If this skeleton is simply a member of the Anguirus species, I want to have a little genetic diversity between them, how some of them can have identifiable features, like instead of a club tail, another member can have one more like a blade, or how one Anguirus has spikes facing forward, another can have one facing backwards, and another can have some facing all directions. Showa Anguirus has displayed a great degree of intelligence, being able to work insanely well with Godzilla, speaking to each other in full sentences and following commands. Monsterverse Godzilla is smart, and other titans like Mothra and King Ghidorah are also crazy smart, but I wanted intelligence to be a main feature in the Anguirus species, like how elephants and whales are so incredibly smart despite being so physically large and powerful. Here, the Anguirus species would originate in the Monsterverse, but they would have some genetic relativity to the Ankylosaurus, similar to how Doug is genetically related to Godzilla species. At first, the prehistoric counterparts would resemble an actual Ankylosaurus, but over time with the Hollow Earth energy, they become a lot larger. But like I said, Anguirus is a very simple kaiju, especially comparing him to titans like Amhaluk or Kamosats or Shimu, just mainly relying on their armor, but their intelligence would play a great part in their survival and evolution. Just like how elephants and whales rely on and protect each other, so do the Anguiruses. At first with their armor evolving bands, allowing them to roll. They'd at first just simply use it as protection. The very worst they do against another predator is guard themselves or each other, but over time, their intelligence would allow them to realize how dangerous their armor really is. Instead of just rolling into a ball and allowing a predator to tire themselves out, they would gain momentum with their powerful hind legs and tail. This would also act as an energy reserve, where instead of spending energy to chase off a predator, they would roll towards the predator at insanely fast speeds while also being protected but still dangerous. And if they need to get somewhere fast like down a hill, the Dragon Ball would come in handy. Over time, their intelligence would provide them tactics. When a Titan would go near a group, several of the Anguiruses would surround the Titan, inching closer to it with their dangerous spikes facing forwards toward it. So now the Titan has no way of escaping if it can't fly, but if it can jump, it better hope it can jump far enough over an Anguirus before landing on top of it. Like many of the big but brilliant animals on Earth, the Anguirus species would then have emotional intelligence, feeling emotions like affection. Keep in mind, the Monsterverse now has a more animalistic take on the Titans, but that doesn't mean this isn't possible. Wild animals feel affection for each other all the time. Many people think that feelings like love and care are only for humans or domesticated animals like dogs and cats, when many animals all over the world can feel it. Whales and elephants have love and affection straight up geared into their brain. Elephants mourn the loss of other group members and have funerals. Whales remember their offspring. So if it were up to me, I'd have Anguirus be incredibly intelligent for a Titan, but also capable of love and care, which can tie into his Showa counterpart, where he's even stated to be Godzilla's friend, and in other media, they seem to genuinely get along. A symbiotic relationship is when two animals of different species can benefit off each other. When a crocodile allows a bird to eat food stuck in its teeth, the bird eats some extra food, while the crocodile gets its teeth cleaned, preventing things like infection and tooth decay. Badgers and foxes partner up. When they're chasing prey, if it hides in a tight area, the badger will go in to chase it out, and have the fox attack it. Godzilla and Mothra have a symbiotic relationship. So does Godzilla and Anguirus, but their relationship isn't just symbiotic, but a genuine friendship. And this friendship would play one of two ways that I would fit Anguirus in the Monsterverse. Godzilla himself technically isn't from the Hollow Earth. He was born in Madagascar. What if when Godzilla was young, he had actually met a young Anguirus, forming a symbiotic relationship, aiding each other to help each other grow stronger? Later on is when King Ghidorah would show up the first time on Earth, where it would be like Destroy All Monsters, with Anguirus aiding Godzilla to fight Ghidorah. However, in this version of the adaptation, is why we'd have the skeleton. Now when Godzilla fought King Ghidorah the first time, they fought in Antarctica. But if in this version of the adaptation, if this skeleton is Anguirus, why is it near Godzilla's lair when they're not in Antarctica? Remember how we said elephants would have funerals and mourn the passing of other members of the herd? If King Ghidorah were to kill Anguirus in this version, after Godzilla wins, he'd be so stricken with grief that he'd be carrying Anguirus around with him, eventually leading to the lair where Anguirus would rot away. But that's just the first version of the adaptation. In this second version I have, this isn't the Anguirus but just simply another member. And this would be the one I would focus on if I was given the chance to adapt it. Like how Kong's species after the war is incredibly endangered, this war could have caused a great impact on the ecosystem of the Hollow Earth, endangering and wiping out many species, including Anguirus. And how migration to the surface is possible, like how the Iwi migrated from the Hollow Earth to Skull Island. There's a chance that Anguirus' species did the same, but the war was so great, it's practically extinct. Even Anguiruses who were able to successfully escape the Hollow Earth soon perished, which could be why there's a skeleton of an Anguirus near Godzilla's lair. But one member was lucky enough to make it out successfully, being the Anguirus, and over time using his intelligence to survive, growing larger and stronger than before. Now besides lore, what about him actually being in the Monsterverse? Anguirus is kind of like an underdog really. I don't think he's ever won a fight on his own, even outside the movies, but he's always survived them. Besides physical strength, Anguirus is a very tough and durable monster, withstanding monsters physically on par with Godzilla, just knocking him around and he still gets back up. Even in Godzilla Rules of Earth, he went out with the rest of the kaiju to fight the Trilopods and even the Mother. He assisted Godzilla in fighting a bunch of Mechagodzillas. He even got used as a mace to damage King Ghidorah. In Godzilla Legends Underdog, he'd fight pretty much the worst enemy Godzilla has had, Destroya. He'd of course get smacked around. The very most he's even doing is kind of just hurting Ghidorah, but nothing too bad, until the KDF jumped in and blasted him with the Absolute Zero cannon, giving Anguirus the perfect opportunity to roll into a ball and smash right into Destroya, defeating him. This would play out in the Monsterverse, where without Godzilla or interference, he's straight up not winning a fight, but he's surviving it, which plays into Anguirus' whole underdog attribute. He's an incredibly durable monster and they would have that in the adaptation, surviving the fight with King Ghidorah the first time, but not unharmed, surviving against other titans like Amhiluk or Baphomet. He almost never wins, but he never loses either. He survives. Now, I would just like to put Anguirus as he is in the Monsterverse, but I want to add something more. You know how every Toho monster has had something upgraded or added? King Ghidorah's healing factor, Rodan's lava attributes, Mothra's mantis claws and stinger. Even Godzilla got an upgrade, with him literally being able to use the abilities and DNA of other titans like Tiamat. There has to be a reason why even if he doesn't win his fights, he has never lost, right? Why he's so durable besides the natural bio armor, right? If I was in charge of putting Anguirus in the Monsterverse, I would give him the ability of energy absorption, both hollow earth energy, natural radiation, and most importantly, kinetic energy absorption. Bio armor takes a lot of damage, but it also aids itself by absorbing the impact, like armadillo armor. One time a man shot an armadillo. The bullet literally ricocheted and hit the guy. Raiju from that one Pacific realm we don't talk about had that ability and it was really strong, not only being able to cancel and absorb the hits but redirect it. All of Anguirus' body would be able to perform this, but it's of course going to be at its strongest in his armor. Every hit that a titan lands on him, even energy based ones, while it will still do damage, the armor and hide is absorbing the energy. And whenever he wants, he can release it. Not just like a shockwave, but when he hits a titan back, not only does he hit them back with their force, but his force added on to it. Could you imagine being one of the big bad titans, landing devastating shot after shot on Anguirus? His armor is absorbing and containing the kinetic energy, and when he performs his signature Dragon Ball, he is unleashing all that energy back into the titan, plus his own momentum that he's gained. That force would cause massive damage, even to titans like Godzilla and Shimu. A high-frequency blade is usually a science fiction weapon, similar to a railgun, when a blade vibrates at a very high frequency, being able to cut through almost anything. Anguirus would have a secondary ability, where the kinetic energy he's contained is trying to escape. It has to go somewhere. The after effect is his spikes vibrating at a very high speed. So not only would a titan be hit with the combined force of their own and Anguirus' whole body, but be slashed apart by his high frequency spikes. Just like how Godzilla's dorsal fins are very important because they can absorb radiation and become a lot stronger, an Anguirus spike is very important and sought after because of its ability to absorb kinetic energy and vibrate, being able to cut through almost any titan. His role in the Monsterverse can at first be a minor one, just a character you'd know about. Maybe he'd have interactions with the other titans until eventually his role evolves into an important character. Every Monsterverse, they've had to fight a real big bad that could threaten the planet. King Ghidorah, Mechagodzilla, Shimu, and Scar King. If I was making another Monsterverse movie, Anguirus would have a minor role at first. Then everything I've mentioned, I'd show. His immense durability, his intelligence, which would be like how Kong, he'd ignore Ghidorah's alpha call. The fact that besides Mothra, he gets along well with Godzilla, even forming a symbiotic relationship. Then I'd showcase his energy absorption along with him fighting alongside Godzilla and maybe even Mothra and Rodan to fight whatever big bad there is, to kind of complete the whole destroy all monsters vibe. Maybe even Kong would join the fight. He'd definitely be a lasting character that has a huge impact, but that would only be for my story to tell. I appreciate the support I've gotten on my Monsterverse videos. Just like in my other ones, please suggest any Toho monsters or other monsters in general like Ultraman monsters or Gamera monsters that you want to see me put into these videos. And just know that I got some more on the way, so stay tuned. Please be kind to yourselves and each other. Thanks for watching.